Greetings, everyone. European earthquake. The troublemaker falls, losing its most valuable ally. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is shaking in unprecedented geopolitical whirlwinds. From the subtle political maneuvers at the heart of Europe to the suffocating blockade across Middle Eastern waters, a new world order is being forged in drama and tragedy. In today's video, we will delve into the little-known corners. If there are any extraterrestrial entities silently observing Earth, they would surely mistake Hungary for one of the most important countries existing on this planet. In the lead-up to the election that took place last Sunday, the attention from mainstream media was enormous. A powerful media wave could only be matched by the explosive discussions on the most popular social media platforms. And it wasn't just the media that focused all their attention on this decisive vote. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio personally traveled to Hungary to campaign for incumbent Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, following in the footsteps of top populist party leaders from France and Germany. Even President Donald Trump personally called into an Orbán-Fitz party rally, urging the Hungarian people to stand behind and support their leader at all costs. In more hidden and darker corners, there have been numerous reports of Russia seeking to deeply interfere in the election, as the Kremlin tries to sway every single vote in Orbán's favor. Considering that Hungary is just a small and struggling country with only 10 million people, the excessive attention from major powers sometimes seems so absurd that it's almost illogical, like the whole world going crazy and holding its breath over every internal political change in a country like Paraguay. However, the theory of those extraterrestrial entities is actually completely accurate. Despite its modest size and many weaknesses in the economy, the series of events in recent years has inadvertently turned Budapest into one of the most important and strategic capitals in the entire Western Alliance. The reason for this is extremely straightforward and simple. Hungary is a member of the two most powerful organizations in the world, NATO and the European Union, where the charters allow any member country to have veto power over major decisions. While most other members rarely use this ultimate power, Budapest under Orbán has turned the veto into a sharp weapon to bargain, direct major decisions, and continuously push much of Europe into severe crises on the brink. Within the framework of NATO, this became notorious for blocking Sweden from joining the alliance for nearly 2 consecutive years. However, the even more devastating impact is how Orbán used its veto power within the European Union. There, Budapest helped create loopholes in sanctions against members of Vladimir Putin's regime, just delaying crucial loans for Ukraine, and in general, turning every summit into a dramatic, high-stakes game. To say that this has disappointed Europeans would be an understatement. Hungary is essentially a recipient of aid from the bloc, which means Orbán's regime is sustained by money coming from taxpayers in wealthier countries. And then Budapest uses these very resources to fiercely fight against Europe's core values, trying to undermine the bloc from within. But while this is merely an annoyance for European leaders, for Ukraine, it is an existential threat to the fate of the nation. When the United States stopped providing direct support and instead allowed partner countries to purchase American equipment to donate to Kyiv, Ukraine had to rely entirely on Europe to sustain its fierce fight against Russian aggression. That's why, when Orbán recently vetoed the €90 billion loan for Kyiv, a loan that Budapest had previously agreed to and was specially designed so that not a single cent from Hungary's money would be lost, it caused such concern. We have to understand that the price to pay is so enormous that it threatens to completely collapse Ukraine's resistance efforts on the battlefield. In other words, it can be said that Hungary has truly succeeded in creating an international role far beyond its actual size and wealth. And that doesn't even include the efforts that Orbán has made to put himself at the center of an international populist conservative movement, a movement that attracts support from all over the world, from Malay leaders in Argentina to Andrej Babis in the Czech Republic, and of course the Republican Party under Donald Trump. All of that created a bitter irony when last Sunday's election was decided almost entirely by domestic livelihood issues. The challenger, Peter Markizé, won not by focusing on Ukraine, Europe, or NATO, but by emphasizing issues that hit close to home for people's wallets, such as persistent inflation and Hungary's severely deteriorating infrastructure, combined with sharp criticism of Orbán's personal corruption. The result was an absolute majority in parliament with 138 seats for his party, the most overwhelming victory for any Hungarian politician since Orbán's first major win in 2010. However, even if voters were thinking of nothing beyond rising prices and low wages, the basic truth remains that this result will be strongly felt throughout the entire Western world. If you have been closely following this election, you probably know that the winner, Peter Markizai, is not exactly the type to drape himself in sunflower garlands, wave the Ukrainian flag, raise his fist, and shout slogans. Having spent a long time within Orbán's Fidesz party, Markizai has been quite vague about his lack of support for sending weapons to Ukraine. He is not enthusiastic about the idea of this country joining the EU, and has previously criticized Zelensky for his verbal attacks on Orbán. So you might wonder why we dare to boldly predict a significant improvement in the position of the latter. The first reason is Europe. Marx's vision of Hungary seems to be that of a country located at the center of the European Union, working in close cooperation with its neighbors, instead of sneaking around behind the scenes and waving a threatening fist like a stage villain. Most of that would mean doing things like restoring the rule of law and stamping out the corruption from the Orbán era. But it also means that Budapest would give up its veto over the 90 billion euro loan for Kiev, closely linked to the release of billions in EU support funds for Hungary by the European Commission. With Mitsu's promise to voters to restore normal relations with Europe, allowing the loan to go through is almost inevitable. And this is absolutely vital because Ukraine's treasury will soon be depleted without it. That doesn't mean Kiev will definitely go bankrupt if Orbán stays in power. European leaders have quietly prepared backup plans behind the scenes in case Orbán remains in power. However, Magda's victory has removed a major obstacle to future funding for Ukraine. At the same time, it ends the threat from Hungary of vetoing sanctions against Russia. These are sanctions that all 27 European countries must unanimously vote to renew every 6 months. This victory is also likely to reduce threats from other European capitals that have been considering making things difficult for Kiev. Among the current EU leaders, there are two others who side with Orbán when it comes to Ukraine. They are Andrej Babis in the Czech Republic and Zubaj Ebico in Slovakia. Of these two, Babis has always been less of a concern. His anti-Ukraine rhetoric has never really been sharp, and he mainly focused on demanding concessions, such as ensuring that not a single Czech taxpayer's koruna would be used in that 90 billion euro loan. However, the veto from Slovakia is a completely different kind of beast. Not only because public opinion polls show that a large number of the ruling party's voters support Russia and turn their backs on Ukraine, but also because the Slovak Prime Minister himself has threatened to continue blocking European initiatives, even if Orbán loses the election. However, the scale of Orbán's heavy defeat has made that worst-case scenario much less likely. While all of this is good news from Ukraine's perspective, it is actually the second reason that truly makes us believe that Marksar's victory is a resounding win for Kiev. It's because the Kremlin has just officially lost its most valuable puppet in all of Europe. These stories don't just imply that Budapest is colluding with Moscow. It's like throwing concrete evidence and payment receipts right onto the table. There have been reports showing that the Hungarian foreign minister proposed sharing internal European Union documents with his Russian counterpart through the embassy in Moscow. European leaders have even had to keep quiet during important European Council meetings because they knew that the Hungarian side would immediately report everything said directly to Moscow. Even more embarrassing was the leaked transcript of a phone call between Orbán and Putin, in which Orbán declared that in any matter where he could assist, he was always ready to serve Putin. This was before he compared himself to a small mouse trying to help the great northern power, Russia. Of course, this doesn't mean that Putin is directly running Hungary's foreign policy from the Kremlin. We're not at the point of claiming that the Hungarian leader is a double agent created in some Moscow laboratory, but it does show a shocking level of coordination that goes far beyond Orbán simply pursuing an independent foreign policy, as other leading NATO countries like France often do. Instead, the reports seem to suggest that Budapest is working closely with Russia. However, that doesn't mean we should expect an immediate direct impact on the course of the war. Although not providing the agreed €90 billion loan to Kiev would be a disaster. But Europe's goal has always been to find a way to bypass Hungary's veto if necessary. Iran has challenged the U.S. Navy. It's been more than 24 hours since the U.S. blockade around Iran's seaports began to tighten, and up to this point, the operation has been an absolute success. According to the latest updates from Central Command, not a single Iranian ship has been able to slip through the iron net of the U.S. fleet. A formidable force of over 10,000 sailors, Marines, and Air Force personnel, along with more than a dozen warships and dozens of fighter jets, is relentlessly carrying out this blockade mission. Throughout the entire first day and night, not a single ship was able to break through the U.S. blockade. 6 merchant ships were forced to comply with the order and quietly turned back to Iran's ports in the Gulf of Oman. However, there are a few key points that need to be clarified in order to properly understand the nature of the current situation. This is a blockade directly targeting the ports of Iran, not a blockade of the entire Strait of Hormuz. The United States is not preventing any ships from entering or leaving this strait if their destination is other Gulf countries. It is Iran that is trying to obstruct those ships. The United States is only focusing on intercepting vessels heading to or coming from the ports of the Tehran government. As confirmed by the Central Command, U.S. forces are still protecting the freedom of navigation for cargo ships passing through the strait to ports outside Iranian territory. Over the past 24 hours, there have been many rumors about 1 or 2 ships successfully passing through the Strait of Hormuz. This really needs to be thoroughly explained. If you look at the map, you can clearly see the location of the Strait of Hormuz. But the important thing to remember is that the U.S. blockade line is not located right at the choke point of the strait. It is set further south, possibly deep in the Gulf of Oman, or even offshore in the Indian Ocean, right at the gateway leading into the Gulf. This means that a ship can dock at an Iranian port, then head back out and cross the Strait of Hormuz again without ever encountering the U.S. fleet, simply because the U.S. warships are stationed farther away. The ultimate goal of the U.S. is to intercept these ships after they try to escape from the Gulf of Oman. And as the Central Command has stated, 6 ships have been stopped and forced to turn back after just passing through the strait, being pushed back to the Iranian ports in the Gulf of Oman area. So, even though Iranian ships may still be passing through the Strait of Hormuz, that doesn't mean they've escaped the U.S. blockade. Meanwhile, the new U.S. strategic blockade is expanding to increase the crushing pressure on Iran. Remember, just 2 weeks ago, the U.S. eased some sanctions on Iran's seaborne oil with the intention of increasing supply to cool down global oil prices. That was also when India became one of the first countries to purchase this no longer sanctioned oil. Marking the first time in 1 or even 2 decades, India made such a deal. However, the scenario changed unexpectedly just this morning when President Trump had a direct phone call with Indian Prime Minister Modi. According to public statements from Mr. Modi, the 2 leaders discussed the situation in Asia and the importance of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and safe. However, the words on paper are not what we are really concerned about. It is India's actions right after that call that are the key issue. Just a week ago, India had ordered about 2 million barrels of oil from Iran, and that shipment was on its way. But it seems that after the conversation with Trump, India refused to accept this shipment. It is still not possible to say for sure what this means, as this information just broke right before we started filming, but all signs indicate that the U.S. sanctions against Iran seem to have been reactivated. Although there has been no official announcement to confirm it, the actions already unfolding have effectively confirmed this scenario. All the details will gradually become clearer over time. But at the moment, it seems that Iran is under increasing pressure both economically and financially. All these developments are taking place while a ceasefire is still in effect. It seems that back-channel talks are still continuing, as there are reports suggesting that another negotiation may take place within the next 2 days. Therefore, it is very likely that by Thursday, a peace agreement will take shape. This time, the meeting will probably not be at as high a level as before, since Vice President J.D. Vance is unlikely to attend. This is a positive sign, and the negotiations have actually made certain progress. The biggest question now is whether the Iranian side will be flexible enough and accept the key conditions set by the U.S. for everything to be finalized. Perhaps because these behind-the-scenes discussions are still ongoing, and the United States is receiving optimistic signals from Iran that they are ready to move towards some kind of agreement, that's why J.D. Vance's attitude has become so positive. Another important detail was revealed in this interview, something we had previously speculated about. That is, the United States has now confirmed that the Iranian representatives present at that meeting actually did not have any real authority to sign any agreements. The American delegation only realized this after nearly 20 hours of negotiations, and that was also when the discussions had to be temporarily halted. The negotiations did not break down. They were only temporarily paused to make way for deeper calculations. That is exactly how Vice President J.D. Vance is reshaping the situation after those tense hours at the negotiating table. The ball is now completely in Iran's court. The American delegation has drawn a clear and unyielding red line. Tehran must remove all nuclear materials from its territory. J.D. Vance admitted that after more than 20 hours of intense negotiations in Pakistan, they realized that those sitting across from them did not actually have the ultimate decision-making power. They are merely messengers, and now they are forced to return to Tehran to seek instructions from the supreme leader or those who hold real power to see whether they will accept the harsh conditions that the United States has put on the table. They must permanently abandon their ambition to possess nuclear weapons and end all support for terrorism. This is a historic trade-off between a prosperous future and a risky pursuit of power. The United States has proposed that Iran accept a uranium enrichment freeze lasting up to 20 years. In response, Iran offered a much more modest number, only about 5 years. This bargaining is an astonishing step forward. Just last week, Iranian officials declared that uranium enrichment was their inviolable right. Yet now they have begun discussing how long they will suspend that right. However, in the United States itself, strong opposing opinions are emerging. Many people are concerned that accepting a suspension, whether for 5 years or 20 years, means implicitly acknowledging Iran's nuclear capability. They believe this is a dangerous concession because it only delays, rather than eliminates, the threat at its root. In reality, however, international agreements often work this way, extending the timeline and continuing to renew the agreement as it nears expiration. Another worrying issue emerging in recent reports is that Iran's ballistic missile program seems to have been left off the negotiating table. This is certainly something that makes the Gulf countries and Israel extremely uneasy, because these missiles are the most direct and immediate threat to them. If the U.S. does not thoroughly address this issue, a new arms race in the Middle East will be almost inevitable. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, or Bahrain may be forced to develop their own missile programs to defend themselves against threats from Tehran. But above all technical issues, there is a critical choke point in global energy supply that we have not seen mentioned much in official discussions. That is the Strait of Hormuz. In public statements, Iranian officials still blatantly demand absolute control over this strait, a claim that completely goes against international law and conventions. Vance has spoken out strongly on this issue. He affirmed that keeping the Strait of Hormuz completely open and free for all ships to pass is one of the United States' non-negotiable red lines. The U.S. has halted airstrike campaigns to facilitate a ceasefire, and in return they expect Iran to give up blocking this global economic lifeline. Do you believe that Iran will truly give up its nuclear ambitions in exchange for economic prosperity?